Fears. Amber, are you there with us? Amber is a clinical mental health counselor and is going to talk to us today about building empathy skills for all ages and working together. So Amber, welcome and come inspire us.
Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever it is that you are coming from. I'm going to share my screen for everybody here. I hope everyone can see this. Just going to start my presentation. Can everybody see my PowerPoint here? Yeah, I'm seeing some nods. Okay. Well, good morning. Again, my name is Amber Fears. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and I'm also something called a qualified mental health associate here in the United States. That basically just means that I can work in mental health. And I'm also a clinical mental health counseling intern. Today, I'm going to talk to you guys just a little bit about what I do and how I incorporate my own values and volunteerism into my work. And then we're going to kind of get into a talk about some of the evidence-based practices and interventions I utilize with my clients and how you can kind of think about those things in your own life and use those things, whether you work in mental health or some other field, to kind of inspire others and build skills in children and support the families around you. So we will just get right into it. I want to remind everyone about what values and volunteerism really means. Values are the things we believe that lead us to do the things that we do. So I work in mental health because my values really align with thinking that everybody deserves access to wellness and access to good and positive health outcomes. I believe that we are all entitled to healing and overall just general good welfare. Similarly, volunteerism, I implement those values in my own work. I work for a nonprofit organization that serves children and families in kind of those surrounding communities. And so that's kind of how I do my part in my little corner of the world. I'm here in Oregon, Corvallis, Oregon. I work somewhere called the Old Mill Center for Children and Families. As my day job, I do something called skills training. It's very behavioral focused, very coping skills focused. I do that with youth ages 3 to 17. It typically involves me either going to a family home and working under a therapist and kind of implementing some of those treatment goals in the home setting. And then I also go to different youth programs. I utilize evidence-based practices. I educate the staff on how to help youth kind of through different things they're experiencing in the moment. I help them help the youth kind of succeed in the school structure and the after-school program structure because a lot of youth struggle with that. On a similar note, I'm also a child and family therapist intern, and that's pretty much just what I am hoping to do eventually with my life. I'm in a master's program, and so yeah, I'm really hoping to kind of get there soon, but I'm learning. I do believe I'm the youngest person in this group, and so I find it really valuable, and I hope you guys too, to kind of see my perspective of the world as a young person, how I'm helping other young people. And yeah, I think that's really important. Similarly, at my work, we have kind of different branches. So we have the relief nursery and a preschool. We have something called the intensive treatment services, which is like a very small classroom of behaviorally challenged children. We have something called the healthy family departments, and they are in charge of offering resources to families in need. And then we have occupational therapy, because who doesn't need that? So kind of thinking about some of my own achievements and successes in the organization I work in. Again, something that's been really important in my department and also in the Healthy Families department is providing resources for families who don't have access to whether it be like transportation or even basic survival needs like clothes or food. Or even like education, even computers and that kind of thing. We have something we call the resource room, where different places kind of donate. Like I think we just got a big donation from like Safeway or something. And our resource room has like food and clothes and even electronic devices. And people can just go in there and take them before their therapy session or their skills training session. And so we really try to advertise that. Similarly, we have multiple events. We have something called Lily's Lope for Hope, which is just like a 5K run where people are raising money for charity and to kind of donate to Old Mill. We have the Season of Giving, which is really similar to our resources. We have like a giving tree where you can buy a present for a youth who might not get presents for a holiday. And since we're a nonprofit, we do get a lot of grant funding. For me, this is very important because often we get families in counseling who are thinking that they might need to have to pay out of pocket. A lot of families don't have insurance or access to healthcare or anything like that. We actually have something called the VOCA grant. It stands for Victims of Violent Crime. And so that actually it's kind of like their insurance. They don't have to be a victim of violent crime to receive that grant, but that counts as their insurance. And we can put that on their treatment plan, and that will actually fund them to receive services. Obviously, I work in mental health, and I think anywhere you go in the world, there's going to be some challenges with that. I have a statistic on here. It's from 2020, and it talks about school-age children experiencing mental health diagnoses and issues. I think we can all kind of think about the fact that that 16.5% is probably a much bigger number now. I put this statistic simply because it's from the CDC, and I think a lot of people probably know what the CDC is. You can kind of research that yourself if you would like to. And so just thinking about that and working in such a small organization, we actually have a wait list of hundreds and hundreds of youth. And so that's been a really big challenge because me as a clinician and as a intern, I don't have a big enough caseload for that many people. And similarly, no one else on my team has that either. Right now, we only have 5 clinicians, and we're currently hiring for more and trying to find other people to at least volunteer their time. So that's definitely been a big struggle. Another thing I see is an issue with family collaboration. So often I will have families come in and we do our intake session. I'm kind of learning about the presenting concerns, and the family's like, okay, fix my kid. And I'm like, no, this is a collaborative process. We all need to work together to help this child get their needs met and to help them kind of move through the trauma that they experienced and the healing that they need to experience. So that's something I often see. I see that in schools as well. Even when like a child's struggling with grades, often we see the parents sometimes put that on the teacher, help my kid. And it's like, okay, let's all collaborate. We all need to work together so that this child can get their needs met. Similarly, funding, it's a nonprofit. It's not always butterflies and rainbows. Sometimes we don't have funding for a lot of things that we need. Obviously, there's something called compassion fatigue. I'm sure a lot of us know what that term means, but that is when a clinician's emotional capacity is just at the max. I currently have more clients on my caseload than I can handle because I'm trying to serve as many people as possible. And that often leads me to needing to do extra self-care, extra being kind to myself so that I can continue to offer my services and my emotional energy to people. And overall, we provide so many resources to people, but if they don't have access to transportation to even get to our site, then they're not going to get those resources. And often, we see our resource room empty because we leave it open. You can go in there and take whatever you need. And there's a lot more people than you'd think who go in there every day and get something that they need. So often we see a lack of resources. So kind of thinking about what I'm doing and what you can do to kind of serve your communities in a similar way that I do, even if you're not a skills trainer or a mental health counselor. I'm sure you know a teacher or someone who has a child in an after-school program. Maybe you have worked closely in that circle. You probably know someone if it isn't yourself. And so I'm going to talk a lot about my own interventions that I implement into classrooms and into youth programs and childcare programs. And you can also kind of work on implementing those things as well, if that's something you're available to do. Again, thinking about values and volunteerism, we really want to if you can volunteer that energy, educate teachers if you can, educate the kids if you can on what they can do to make all these experiences better and get their needs met. Similarly, in my own work, we need to see a lot more department collaboration. And I've heard that this is kind of an overall issue in nonprofits and just big organizations. When you have separate wings, people don't always communicate. And so that can be a big problem too. The biggest thing that's the most important of all of this is empathy. And so that's why I'm going to talk about some of the skills that I use working with kids, and how all of these actually relate to empathy and are empathy skills that I'm using with them. Something I use everywhere I go in skills training and in counseling is something called ACT limit setting. That's when a child is doing something you don't want them to do. So let's say that they're hitting you. That's when I would acknowledge the child's feelings. And then I would communicate that limit. I'm not for hitting. And then you target an acceptable behavior. So obviously we're seeing that they have a need. They have a need to hit. So I'm going to target, okay, maybe they can hit this pillow instead of me. And that's a step in the right direction. And I'm also empathizing with them. Like, wow, they're experiencing this need to hit and they don't have the resilience skills to do anything else when they're frustrated right now. Eventually, with counseling and even with skills training and that kind of thing, hitting turns into screaming at a pillow rather than hitting the pillow. Eventually, it can turn into talking about the problem. And that's what we're trying to do. In that moment, if you can use ACT limit setting, you're being empathetic and it kind of helps the kiddo feel accepted in that moment. Similarly, I look at something called zones of regulation. And so when I'm seeing a child act in a certain way, I'm trying to see what zone they're in, because I know if they're in the green zone, which means they're happy, they're ready to learn, they're going to hear what I'm telling them, and they're going to be able to learn from me and learn from others. If they're getting to yellow or red, which might mean they're feeling worried, they're feeling really energetic, or maybe they're feeling really angry, if they're in any of those zones, I know that their brain is doing this. It's closing a little bit. And so they can't hear me as much. And so my approach is being able to recognize the zone. And I help teachers implement this into their classrooms as well. There's actually like one of the schools I work at now, they have like a bunch of posters all along the hallways of just zones of regulation. And the kiddos are also, they learn kind of what that means. And so I even have kids come up and tell me I'm red. And then we work on that together. Very similar to limit setting, we have something called collaborative problem solving. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go super into that, but it's very similar to limit setting. And basically, it's just working with the child in the moment to meet the adult's need as well as meet the child's need. I do something called a co-parenting class too, in my work at this organization. And something I teach parents who, co-parenting class basically just means it's parents who come into the class and they're going through a divorce and they're trying to help their child experience that and be okay with that process and all the feelings that can come with that. And something I teach those parents is that they can actually be a thermostat and not a thermometer. That means that when a child's feelings are revving up, like a thermometer would, we're staying the same. We're staying calm. We're helping them through that because that energy is going to match. On a similar level, again, thinking about empathy, when we tell a kiddo, you did a great job. If they do something good, we need to explain why. Because in their brain, they're going to think, well, I did a great job, but I don't know why. And now I want to keep doing a great job, but I don't know how to do that, right? And so when you say you're doing a great job, you can also follow that up with, you're doing a great job because you're using kind words, or you're doing a great job because you chose not to hit when I saw you wanted to hit. Yeah, moving on, I want to kind of go back again to thinking about values and volunteerism. Again, my values are that everyone is entitled to healing and to wellness. Everyone's entitled to overall good health. And so I do my best work as a mental health counselor and as a skills trainer, trying to implement those values through my volunteerism, which is being a counselor and being a skills trainer, going to the different schools, going to the different youth programs and implementing those values. The biggest thing is empathy. And so one thing I think about is that when we look at a child and they are experiencing a problem, as an adult, it's really easy to think, wow, like you don't even know what problems are. I'm an adult, I have a job, I have all these stressors. You don't even know what stress is. For a child, they don't have those resilience skills that adults have yet. And so they also, they cannot really connect their brain to us at all in that way. They can't relate to us in that way. They can only see their straight view. And so when we really look at that, we need to remember to have that empathy and remember that being a child is just as hard as being an adult. The reason for that is they don't have the skills yet. So I'll leave you with something really important that stood out to me that one of my colleagues said. She said, if we are perfect, we lose our ability to learn. And so when I look at kids, I don't want them to be perfect. I don't want myself to be perfect. None of us are perfect. None of us in this room are perfect. We are all human. And if we were perfect, we wouldn't get anywhere anymore. It would just stay the same. And we want change, and we want people to really implement these values in this group into different industries in the world. And we can't do that if we're not perfect, or if we're perfect. And similarly with kiddos, we can't expect that out of them either. I also put the definition of values and volunteerism at the end there, just kind of as a reminder. My next slide is just kind of references for the evidence-based practices I use, and I'll put those in the chat as well for you guys. But overall, I really just encourage everybody to think about where they're practicing empathy in their life, and where you can implement that. Again, you probably know a teacher, you probably know a child, you probably know someone who could really use somebody to teach them these skills, show them that someone cares for them and that their feelings are valid and okay. So I encourage you to think about that, and thank you for listening.
Amber, thank you so much. And as our youngest speaker and presenter and amazing lady here today, congratulations, you did an amazing job. You're really terrific. And thank you for sharing all that with us. And I love that reminder that you were giving towards the end in particular, that children don't have that same capability that we have of being able to take on board all the stress, all the anxiety, and understand it. And therefore, we must remember to not even just for children, but for other people, we can't equate our own experience with them and make them feel guilty for not having the same troubles or experience that we have. So I thank you for that. I think that was a beautiful thought to make us all think about. So thanks again, and we're